The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Power on.
It's showtime.
Boldly go where no one has gone before.
Warp 1, engage!
Welcome to a journey through time, space, and pop culture. A journey through a career in the special effects industry. Welcome to the Max Effects Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Toft. I'm here with Max. This is episode 8. Things Max built for the Disney parks, including Disney-MGM Studios, now Disney's Hollywood Studios in Orlando, Florida, Disneyland, and Disney's California Adventure in Anaheim, California. Hello, Max. How you doing?
Hey, Kevin. It's great to be here and great to be with you. We decided to do this episode focusing on my work for the Disney company with the imminent reopening of our beloved Disneyland and Disney California Adventure Park.
So with that, why don't we dive into your history with Disney in general? Do you remember your first visit to Disneyland?
I sure do. We didn't have a lot of money growing up as kids, but my dad did take us to Disneyland. I don't think I was yet born, but I have seen pictures of my older brothers and sisters when they were all very little at the park. But my very first time ever going, when I remember it, wasn't until I was 16 years old. And I grew up in Corona, which is about 15, 16 miles away from Disneyland. And that very first time we ever went, I'm like, this is going to be great. This is going to be awesome. And then my dad decided, he finally came through with his promise, and he took us to Disneyland on the 4th of July.
Whoa.
And if you think that gets even more crowded, worse, whatever you might want to say, because it was 4th of July in 1976, the Bicentennial Day.
Okay, you might have me beat. My most crowded day was National Boy Scouts Day. I've never seen the park that full. I can only imagine yours was probably
on the Bicentennial Day. Well, this was when there was still the old parking lot out in front of front of Disneyland. And even as a kid, I was like, oh my God, look at this. Look at these trams coming up and down to pick us up. Even getting to the front of the park is a ride, And
were we still on tickets?
Yes, there were still tickets being used
books
back in the day. Yes. And you had to be careful with your tickets because you wanted to save those best tickets for the best rides. And that's where the whole, that's an e-ticket ride phrase comes from, right, because of the use of the old ticket book system. But I remember getting up to the turnstile and going in, it being the 4th of July, everybody was given a little free clothesline pin of the American flag, which everybody was wearing proudly. And, I remember going into Tomorrowland and it being very early, the park had just opened. Place was empty. It was great. We could walk around. We could go on things easily and quickly. Not so much later in the day, but me being a science fiction kid and a monster kid and loving those sorts of things, the rides that really stood out to me the most were things like the People Mover. I still love the People Mover to this day. I wish desperately they would bring that back. And I love the old Adventure Through Inner Space ride. I must have gone on that ride that day at least 3 times, partly because it was free. That was an attraction that was sponsored by the Monsanto Chemical Company. And since it was sponsored, you didn't have to use a ticket to go on it, but basically it being free. And I love that, right? It was such an amazing sleight of hand in using forced perspective and oversized props and sound and light effects to really fool you into thinking you had been shrunk. And I remember the old rocket jets when they used to be way up high up above the People Mover station, and it being the 4th of July and being the Bicentennial. A couple of years before this, they had converted the old Carousel of Progress show into what was then called America Sings. And it was basically sort of like a history of American music told in 4 acts and told by animatronic animals. And these are all just big standout attractions to me, like Haunted Mansion was, and, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean was. So it was just awesome. It was just awesome.
So for those of you that don't, in case we have any young listeners out there, the way they used to run the park was I can't remember, was there a general admission and I had to buy a book, or you just got in for free and then you had to buy a book?
I think it was the latter. I think it was a case of there was a small general admission price,
right,
and then there was the added price of them buying ticket books. And even once you were inside the park, you could go buy more ticket books or just more tickets.
That I remember. There were other locations in there.
They had little ticket booths set up throughout the park. And there's actually still one of those little ticket booths is still in the park to this day, and most people don't recognize it. If you go to the Alice in Wonderland ride, the very large mushroom that's right there as you board, that was originally a ticket booth.
Interesting.
But it was dressed up to look like a mushroom, but it's been closed up and over, and they, you know, bondoed and repainted it so you can't even tell anymore.
So the way these tickets worked was you'd get a booklet of these color coded tickets, and they were A through E, obviously. And if E was anything that was a ride you would want to do, like
those were the E tickets.
Those were the E tickets.
All the best rides, the newest, biggest, best rides, they were all the E ticket rides.
You know, and because of that, I can't even tell you what an A ticket ride was.
I remember all the A ticket rides were simple but fun things, like riding the horse-drawn carriages or the horse-drawn trolley down Main Street, or riding the double-decker bus, or going into the Main Street Cinema.
Okay.
Which they're all walk-ins now, and things like, you know, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, I think, was like a C ticket and such. So
it's funny how that happens, right? Because as a kid, you know, you just remember the key element. E tickets are the good tickets.
Yep, they're the best. Yeah, and for me, you know, I grew up watching the old Wonderful World of Disney and, you know, World of Color and Disneyland TV shows on Sunday nights. And so to finally get to go to this magical land called Disneyland was everything to me, even at 16 years old. And I instantly fell in love with it. And not just falling in love with the park and everything, but I fell in love with all of the imagination, all the engineering, as we like to say, all the imagineering of the park, and how did they do these amazing things, and that really got my mind going. And so I had a wonderful time that first trip, even if it was super crowded later in the day. I didn't care because I was just there. And to this day, some of my best memories of Disneyland don't involve going on rides. It's just being there and going and finding a nice place to sit down and people watch and have a meal and just be in that magical land. So
a nice park. At the end of the day, it's a nice park.
Oh, it's just the best. I mean, it set the template for everything after that that's ever been done in the theme park industry. Back in the day, there was a great series of magazines put out by the Jansen brothers, and the magazine was called The E-Ticket. And they would go into depth about, the different rides and the history of the park and the amazing Imagineers who were behind it all. And I have every single issue of the magazine that they ever put out. And they even put out some issues sort of like digitally reprinted by putting them out on CD. And even those CDs now, which are out of print, are very valuable collectibles, because now in this digital age, the magazines take up a lot of room, but having them on CD does not. And the one place where I know you can still get the magazines is at the Disney Family Museum up in San Francisco. But, eventually then, like another monumental thing in all of our lives happened. And it was a little film, I don't know if you've ever heard of, called, I don't know, Star Wars.
What?
And exactly. And, you know, I'd always loved building things as a kid. And when Star Wars came out, that made a huge difference. And, you know, the model kits came out and I built them all to the best of my 17-year-old ability. And, you know, one of my friends' parent saw my work and says, you know what, you love building things and you love Disneyland. Why don't you try and get a job at Disneyland? And I thought, well, okay. So I borrowed one of my sister's car and I packed up this model of the X-Wing that I built and I put it in a little suitcase and put some other stuff I had built in it. And I drove to Disneyland and I found where the admissions office, you might say, was, where you would go apply for work. And I told them what I wanted to do. And I showed them my little models that my little 17-year-old mind, you know, my 17-year-old mind thought might get me a job. And they were very polite and everything to me, but they're like, well, we don't really do this sort of thing here. I hadn't even gone to college yet. And I later went, you know, to college and I studied industrial plastics, where I got a bachelor's of arts degree in industrial plastics, which involves the chemistry of plastics and such. So many years later, when I'm now working in the effects industry and had so for quite some time, I was working for a friend of mine, Mike Moore, at a prop company that he co-owned with someone else. And the company's name was, at the time, Proper Effects. And we got this job from this gentleman who turned out to be an art director for Disneyland, for Imagineering, I should say, in Glendale. And they were building this brand new park in Orlando as an addition to all the other parks as part of the greater Disney world. And it was going to be called Disney's MGM Studios. So sort of a joining, you know, sharing of things and such. And they had a brand new ride that they were installing called the Great Movie Ride. Sadly, the Great Movie Ride is no longer with us. It was closed down, I think, a couple of years ago and redone into Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. And it was built at the end of what they called Hollywood Boulevard in a full-size 1-to-1 replica of the famous Grauman's Chinese Theater. And you'd enter into the Chinese Theater's lobby and you'd go back and forth through the queue, seeing all these, you know, famous original movie posters and memorabilia. And the job I was given from my boss, Mike Moore, that when we got this job from the fellow who was an Imagineer there in Glendale, is one of the big movies they were going to feature in the ride was Wizard of Oz. And I'm a huge Wizard of Oz fan.
Me too.
And that's why my buddy Mike gave me the job, because he knew I would do a really good job with it since I was a big fan of it. I found out the art director from that what he wanted built was a replica of Glinda the Good Witch of the North's wand, the Wicked Witch of the West's broom, and the Tin Woodsman's axe. Luckily,
Weapons of war.
you know, laser discs, laser discs were a new thing back then. And the Criterion Collection, which is a very, very well-known company who puts out home media of different types of classic movies, foreign movies and such, they had just put out, like a year before this, Wizard of Oz on Laserdisc. And the difference between a Laserdisc as compared to a DVD or a Blu-ray, DVDs and Blu-rays are compressed. So they literally, it's every other frame and it's a compression. So it makes everything look smooth, and Laserdiscs literally are like every single frame of the film has been captured in digital form. And it's like it's showing you a slideshow. So I had a Laserdisc player. I had the Wizard of Oz Criterion Edition Laserdisc. And I went home, I studied it, and I made drawings off of Glinda's wand. So and one of the other nice things you could do with Laserdiscs that you could not do with VHS is Laserdiscs, you could freeze frame and you wouldn't have any blur unless the object on camera was in movement, which the blur would be natural. Yeah. And I was able to do freeze frames of Glinda's wand. Every single time you could see it in the movie, I would do freeze frames and I did drawings of it. And that's when I noticed Glinda's wand is a piece of clear plexiglass cut into the star shape that's been sprayed with like iridescent glitter. And then they glued a whole bunch of little tiny rhinestones all over it. And by watching it throughout the whole movie and taking notes on it, I then noticed that the pattern is different from one side of Glinda's wand to the other. And luckily, at the very beginning of the movie, when we first meet her, when she greets Dorothy's arrival in Munchkin Land, and then when we see her again at the very end of the movie in the Emerald City, when she sends Dorothy home, I noticed that the pattern of the rhinestones was different on the two different sides. And when I say different, meaning there was different colors. There's a very light baby blue, a very light rose red, and a kind of a clear iridescent stone. And they were in different patterns. The pattern is all the same, but where there might be a blue stone here, on the other side, there's a different colored stone there. I made little diagrams of all this stuff because the art director from Disney, he wanted to see my notes before he gave the go ahead to start building it. And he was amazed. Not so much of a test, but he wanted to make sure that it was going to be right, because this thing is going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of guests. And they wanted to make sure it was as good as possible. There was just one other thing, though, that I did cheat with it. Glinda's wand, the staff of it, is very long. If you look at the film, it's very, very long. And this one needed to fit in a display case. It couldn't be more than 3 feet long to fit in the display case it had to go into. But the real one is almost 5.5 feet long. Oh. I did some research to find out how tall the actress who played Glinda, who is Billy Burke. Billy Burke was very famous back in her day also for the fact that she was Flo Ziegfeld of the Ziegfeld Follies. That was her husband. And she had been around for a long time, ever before she did Oz. Yeah, I cheated and I made the wand staff shorter. It was only about 3 feet long.
Did you even, I would have had a hard time with that. I was like, you want this to be right, don't you? Why don't you make a bigger case?
Oh, no, I told him. He said, no, it's okay. It's the star we want to make sure that's perfectly all right. If we make the staff a little bit shorter, most people aren't going to care. But if we don't get the star right, that's another case of I am the artist who's hired to produce this. It's not my place to make that decision or call. It's the art director's position to make.
That art director should have cared, is what I'm saying.
Well, he did, but he also knew that the limitation was this has still got to fit in a display case. And the display case has already been built because it's built into a wall.
Oh.
And so that was the decision. Cheat on it, leave it just 3 feet long. And then I double cheated because I didn't have to make the staff. I found a golf club that had the right shape, because Glinda's wand is tapered. It's big at one end and it's small at the top, and the small end is where it attaches to the star. So.
And would you wait? You used the golf club to what? Cast it or something? Because you said
no. The golf club, it was already metal and it was had a beautiful chrome finish on it. So I just took the leather wrappings off of the handle grip of the golf club.
But aren't golf clubs stepped? Isn't there like?
No, not all of them. They are now, but they didn't used to be.
How about that?
They used to be just simple and one big long tapered shaft. The reason why they're now stepped is that it makes the tube stronger. The stepping makes the tube stronger, but back then they were just simple, straight shafts.
Any of these issues with any of the other props? Did you have to fudge anything, or?
No, actually, the other props we didn't have to fudge so much. Like the Wicked Witch's broom, one of my coworkers, Regina Pancake, she was really good. She was an SCA person. She learned how to make old-fashioned brooms the way that they used to be made back in medieval times. And so she got the task of making the actual broom portion, the whatever you want to call it, the thatching, part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then my job was to make the rest of it. And the two of us came together to put them together. Like in doing more research, I noticed the witch's broom has 3 red rings up near the end,
Mm-hmm.
where the broom is rounded.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the hardware store and I went looking at shovels, and sure enough, I found a shovel handle that was a long dark wood, and it had 3 red rings in the right places. And it's like,
are you
oh my
kidding
God,
me? You got so lucky.
They must have used a shovel way back then. I just happened to find that they still made these shovel handles exactly the same way all these many years. So we didn't have to make the broom stick. I did have to lathe a piece of aluminum tube into a shape, because it had these 2 like rounded edges and a slight taper to it. So that part I had to make custom. And then if you go back and you watch the movie, there's this really intricate like leather laced straps around the top of the thatching of the broom where it attaches to the handle.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then there's this aluminum ring that goes between the leather straps and then the broom handle. I think for that one, the broom, that hardest part was probably what Regina did, which was to put the thatching together. And then the second hardest thing was to bring it all together to finish it off. The simplest of the 3 items was the Tin Woodsman's axe, because
axe
it
handle,
must have been
silver.
The axe was just an axe. And I went out to a camping store and I found an axe that had the right curved shape to it, because the Tin Woodsman's axe is not just a simple straight rod. It has a slight little bit of a curve in it, and I just found one, and then we just spray painted it dull aluminum. We used Krylon dull aluminum paint on it, and the prop master just loved them. And when he saw them, when he came to see the shop, to see them when they were done, he was like, "These are amazing. These are great. These are going to look awesome."
Even in the movie, the axe head never felt like a metal axe head to me, because it didn't seem. How it gets thin where the cutting part is. The one in the movie never really seemed to have that.
Yeah. I think it's because they probably made a rubber one most of the time, because axes are really heavy.
Yeah, that would have
been. And you want the actor to have to carry that around the whole time. Not to mention it's not safe. Sure. So they probably made a rubber one for the actor to carry the actor to carry around. You
almost said Buddy Epson.
Yeah, I did. Buddy Epson, for everybody out there, Buddy Epson was originally cast and was going to play the Tin Woodsman. But there was they were doing a makeup test on him, and the makeup they tested on him had real aluminum powder mixed into a white cream base, and the aluminum got into his skin and poisoned him, and he got incredibly sick and had to go to a hospital, and was there in the hospital, I think, for like 3 weeks. And so he got replaced, and Jack Haley ended up taking over the part of playing the Tin Woodsman. All because of that awful makeup mistake.
Higher resistance to aluminum being shoved into his epidermis.
Well, no, they completely changed the makeup.
I know. I was just
for Jack Haley, because they didn't want to take that risk.
Hey, that was dangerous. Don't do that again.
Yeah, exactly. So those three props from The Wizard of Oz were the first 3 things I ever made for a Disney park.
So how about Disneyland out here in good old sunny California?
Well, then many years later, I was still working for Mike Moore at Proper Effects, and we were contacted by a different art director from Disneyland from Imagineering, and that's how we ended up getting to do a bunch of the props that are now in Toontown. It was way back when Toontown was a new thing. So some of those items are that we did for Toontown. When you walk through Mickey's house in Toontown.
Mhm.
It eventually leads you out into a supposed imaginary backyard, which then leads you into Mickey's movie barn, where Mickey's filming a brand new movie right now with all his pals, and he wants you to come see him. And as you're walking through the movie barn, you see lots of different props. In one area, there are these big, tall stacks of movie cans, and they're just incredibly precariously placed. They look like if you were to breathe on them, they'd all fall over and they'd go banging to the floor. And we made those. Disney actually sent us boxes of old, real metal movie cans. And
real reels?
Yes, real reels. But there was no reels inside of them. They were just empty cans. And Mike came up with a great idea. He had one of our guys weld like a 1 foot square plate of steel, and then he welded like an 8 foot long steel rod to the plate so that the plate could get bolted to the floor when it would get installed. And we punctured all of the film cans. So it was like, putting a bunch of Oreo crackers on a pin,
right?
Like and they were all pushed through the steel rod, and then we put a little silicone glue on between them so they would all be stuck to each other. But because the steel rod was then bent into this weird shape, they would look like they were going to fall over at any moment, but they wouldn't,
Right. And because they were real ones, you couldn't tell whether they had anything in there holding them up. Looked like they were going to fall over. Yeah,
exactly. And then the only one that wasn't punctured all the way through was the one at the very top, which, because they're so tall, the guests wouldn't be able to see that. And I think we made like 3 or 4 of those stacks, and then we made a whole bunch of these very large, oversized, very cartoon-like musical instruments, because one of the featured cartoons they were going to be showing is the band concert, which is a really classic old Mickey cartoon
in a tornado,
which takes place in a tornado and everything, to the William Tell overture. So we made we sculpted and made all these big oversized cartoon musical instruments, which you see as you walk through. There's like drums and other instruments, but the one that I got to make is that when you walk by them, there is a shelf with 5 saxophones on the shelf. And I made all the saxophones. And, Disney is usually really, really super precise about what they want. And in that particular instance with the saxophone, I went to the art director from Imagineering. I said, well, do you have a drawing? Do you have measurements for how big you want the saxophone? And he kind of laughed and he says, well, you've seen The Simpsons, right? I said, yeah, why? He says, you've seen Lisa Simpson, right? She plays the saxophone. Make it look like Lisa Simpson's saxophone. And then he gave me a measurement saying, okay, and I want it to be no longer than this, from the tip of the mouthpiece down to the bottom of the horn. I said, okay. So that's what I went ahead and did. And he said, and we need them to be really durable, because the guests will be able to touch these as they walk by. So we need them to be really durable and like bulletproof. So my boss, Mike Moore, and I decided, well, we'll vacuum form them out of really thick plastic. And we vacuum formed them out of like 1/4 inch thick white ABS plastic, which is one of the strongest sheet plastics you can use. Made them in 3 pieces, as a left piece and a right piece, and then the depression, piece, which would then go into where the horn is.
Into the bell.
Yeah, into the bell. And then for the valves, we needed to have, like, again, we're just mimicking a cartoon, so it doesn't have to be super precise and certainly not functional. I made 3 different sizes of saxophone valves, and then we made a silicone mold off of them. And then we just made 3 castings of each different size, and we bolted them onto the side. So although it looks like there's a whole bunch of them changing from size from small to large, it's really just 3 sizes duplicated 3 times. And it was originally 6 saxophones, but one of them At the last minute, they decided not to put it in the area there in Toontown where you walk through the movie barn, but they moved it. So actually, I can say there's one of my pieces of work, which is also in the Roger Rabbit cartoon spin ride as you walk through the pre-show, which I love that pre-show. That pre-show is one of the pre-shows that like you actually enjoy walking through the queue, getting to the ride. And there's like a prop barn, which is all, surrounded by chicken wire. So you can't get in and touch anything. And if you look in there, one of my other saxophones was put in there just to help flesh it out and drag it out. So as you continue walking through Mickey's movie barn, then you eventually get to a point where you're like in a big fake theater and you're watching a bunch of old cartoons running to keep you entertained while you're waiting. And then, the cast members come along and they take your group and they usher you into a room where you're going to get to meet your private moment of getting to meet Mickey Mouse, right? Where he's on set making one of his movies. Unbeknownst to the guests, there are 4 different rooms with 4 different Mickey Mouses, all possibly working at the same time, depending on how crowded the park is that day. And all of the rooms are all done up the same. And Mickey is in his Sorcerer's Apprentice costume. But inside it, it's made to look as if you're on a soundstage. And what's iconic about a soundstage, other than those big ass, wind machines? So we made these giant, like 6.5 foot tall, fake, cartoony wind machines, and those are also in those rooms, and those were all built over at Proper Effects as well. So we got to do, some cool stuff, some cartoon stuff that's there in Toontown. Then many years later after that, I had an old friend of mine who's now retired from Disney who came to me and goes, "Hey, look, we just did a major sprucing up and cleanup in Star Tours, but something that got overlooked because it's way down deep below. Would you be willing to clean this up for me as a favor? I can't pay you, but would you be willing to do this?" I said, "Well, of course I would. I love Disney. I love Star Tours. It's my little way of having a little touch of it." So in the older Star Tours, before they redid it, you would go in after you've passed R2 and 3PO and the Star Speeder 3000, you'd go into an area that used to be called the Droid Repair Shop. And if you would look over the railing way down below into the deep down depths of the droid repair area, there's a standard R2 droid way down in the deep below. And he was standing next to like a little control console, and he had a tall cone-shaped head, and he was all painted. His panels were painted kind of like an aqua blue, and the rest of the body was white. And it had gotten overlooked. And so, I said yes. So we made arrangements to go and pick it up. And my friend said, "Oh, whatever you do, make sure you wear rubber gloves and bring an old dirty sheet so you can wrap it up in, because unfortunately, if somebody can lean over something and spit, there's probably a really good case that somebody has and probably done a lot. And then with oil and dirt and everything else, things are gross down there."
Well, initially it sounded like you were abducting it.
Well, and it was really actually to keep us clean and not get stuff all over the inside of the car. And that's why we also wore rubber gloves. And when we got it back, I took it to my place because I was the only one who had a backyard. And I put it in the backyard up on 3 cinder blocks on its 3 feet. And I sprayed it with Lysol, disinfect it, and then
before you worked on it, right?
Oh yeah. And then I took a scrubber to it and scrubbed it down really good, and then cleaned it off really well. And it's amazing how the color changed. It went from grimy, dirty, off-white to gleaming white, clean white. But there was a few places where the aqua blue paint had gotten scratched and such over the years. So I took a piece of the droid, the 2 little utility arms that are in R2's chest, that pop out, that he uses to manipulate and grab things. Those were separate. So I took one of them to the hardware store. I had paint mixed up, color matched by their computer. And then I went back and I touched up the paint. One of the legs was a little loose, so I fixed that up, and its shoulder where it attached to the body. And there was some electrical work that needed to be done. There was like a small fiber optic light up illuminator inside it that was not working right, so I fixed that up as well. And then I returned it back to my friend, and it got reinstalled. So that's my one small little brush with getting to do something Star Wars related at Disneyland.
I have a story, and I think I've told this to you before, but I remember going on Star Tours once, and they were doing a rehab where they take, like what you did, take the droid and clean it to R2.
Mm-hmm.
R2 in the pre-show for that is atop of the Star Speeder 3000. He's talking to C-3PO. For those of you who haven't been on the ride or don't feel like Googling things, that's what's happening in that part of the ride. I go in there and I'm about halfway through the queue, and I look over and I go, what the? Well, they'd taken R2 out, and they had taken a sonotube and a aluminum salad bowl.
Oh my gosh.
And put it in there. So it was like this R2 torpedo that they had painted and put in its place. Oh, yeah. I made a few phone calls.
Wow.
Like, you guys can't do that.
They would have been better off just to leave it out.
Yes. That's where I was going with that. I was like, holy mackerel. I'm sure they probably have it.
Yeah, that's just embarrassing.
Yeah, I would love to know what command decision somebody said, nobody will notice, just go ahead and stick a sonnet. For those of you who don't know, sonotubes are large cardboard tubes. Usually they use it for, like, if you're doing a cement pylon. It's used in construction. So if you need a form,
they're using construction work.
They pour cement in that for a footing or a large pylon, and it's cardboard. You can just tear it away later, right? That's the whole idea. But it's a very substantial cardboard. For those unaware with what a sonotube is, and you can get them at pretty much any hardware store.
You can find them in most hardware stores, but yeah, it's used in construction. That's hilarious. Did they even at least paint it white?
They painted it perfectly, so it looked like an R2 torpedo. That's what. So yeah, and they didn't even try to put legs on it. So just imagine this. Like an ICBM version of R2 sitting in the top of the Star Speeder 3000. I was like, oh, come on, just don't have them there. Or how about this? Here's a crazy idea. Have two R2s, one that you put in its place, right? Back then Disney wasn't losing much money. I'm sure they could have afforded they must have an alternate. I would have an alternate C-3PO and an alternate R2, so you could take one down and have it refurb and ready to go and take them in. And that's the logical thing to do. Right?
Oh, but you see, so that would take logic, and it would also take money, and they're not going to spend. And there's another reason for it, because and I knew this from my friend when I did the rehab on the droid. Oh, and also that droid I rehabbed, I looked it up. It has a name. It's called an R4M9. And you see it at the very beginning of New Hope, after the Rebel blockade runner has been captured and the stormtroopers have taken over. They're escorting a group of Rebel troopers and two droids down a hallway. The tall cone-shaped headed droid, which is kind of like a off-white with some dark green stripes on its head, that's an R4M9, and that's the type of droid that I had repaired. And I found this out also later, is that all of the droids, all of the R2s that are in Star Tours, at least they were in Disneyland, they were all originals that had been used in the movies. That original R2 that sits inside the Star Speeder is an original all aluminum R2 that was built for the very first film, for New Hope. And I found that out because my friend I was doing the rehab for said, oh yeah, we've got books of information that tell us where everything comes from. That way, in case something gets damaged and they need to replace it, they know, oh, that old-fashioned antique lamp we got from such and such, store, and here's the phone number and address. And well, the same books told them that all of the R2s that they had in Star Tours, they all came from Lucasfilm. They were all originals. Now, the animatronic 3PO, that was not an original because they had to build him custom so they could fit the animatronic mechanisms underneath it all. So that was an original R2. And when he was showing me through the backstage area, I got to go inside the Star Speeder and then saw that, oh my God, the inside of the Star Speeder is wood, and the outside skin is just some vacuum formed body shells that they bolted to all the wood framing. And I knew that R2 was an original because I knew from doing research that the original R2s for New Hope were all made out of aluminum.
Right.
And this R2 inside the Star Speeder, when I went inside it and I put my hands on it, I'm like, oh my God, this thing is cold. This thing is metal. And sure enough, it was an original R2 from New Hope. Because after New Hope, they switched out and they changed to fiberglass for all of the droids, because one of the unfortunate things with the old-fashioned radio control systems of the 1970s was that they were not digital receivers and transmitters. They were analog, and the aluminum skin of the R2s combined with all the sand, which is basically ground up glass of the Tunisian desert, acted like a big scattering to the radio control signals. And that's why they had so much trouble operating the R2s out in the desert, between the aluminum body cutting down on the signal and then the sand scattering the signal. They couldn't get the droids to work out on location. So after that, on Empire, ever since then, all of the R2s have always been made out of fiberglass, so the signal is completely transparent to them. And of course, now modern days we use digital radios, which send very precise signals that don't get distorted by going through different materials.
All right. So now, where should we go in the parks? What would you? Where's the next thing you can think of that would be good?
And then many years later, I was then working for a company called Lexington Scenery, and Lexington got the contract from Imagineering to build a lot of stuff for the, at the time, brand new land, Cars Land in California Adventure.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. Oh, it's they did such an amazing job with it. I mean, you walk in to that main street in Cars Land and you really do feel like you just stepped into the movie, because it just looks and feels just like it.
You know what? I want to touch on that because you hit on something big there. I feel like it's easily as immersive as Galaxy's Edge.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's even more so at night with all the neon, on. It really totally feels just like you stepped into the movie. But yeah, we got the contract to build an awful lot of stuff for Cars Land. Just as you're walking into the land, you walk past Fillmore's geodesic dome, his little area where he's like selling all natural juices and fruits and nuts and other things.
Right.
There's this big geodesic dome, which is supposed to be like his home. While out front of it, there's these oil cans that have been retrofitted to be like bins, and they fill them full of ice, and then they put juice and fruit and other snacks inside these bins.
All natural, baby, right?
Yeah, of course, all natural, baby. Yeah. So we had to take real oil cans and retrofit them and make them into that. And then the other oil cans that are in a big stack, in there in the geodesic dome, they've all been fitted with like what looked like spigots. You know, well, those spigots are actually plastic. We sculpted them and then took a silicone mold off of them, and we cast them so they'd be really, really durable out of fiberglass. And then they were bolted to the steel drums. Again, it's all about the show and making it look great for the audience, but it also has to be durable because the audience can touch these things. And some people aren't as nice as you would expect them to be with, you know, objects in Disneyland and parks and stuff like that. And then as you further go down into Cars Land, you pass Sarge's Queensnet hut, you know, which is where his little gift shop is. Well, we made up on the roof of his shop, the Quonset hut, there's a big cannon on the roof, you know, and it says Sarge's, and it looks great at night with the little blinking green neon of it blowing out a shell. Well, we made that cannon as well, and it's all fiberglass, so it can withstand being out in the weather and everything.
Did they do the neons? Did they do the neons separate? Or you have to work with that company?
Yes, somebody else made the neon. Well, because you know Disney would supply us and the other clients making the neon with full size drawings.
Okay.
So that you know they could make their neon full size, and our piece was built full size to the drawings, and that way, if everybody's done everything right, everything will match when it goes time to put the parts together. But yeah, and then as you go further down past Sarge's shack, his Quonset hut, there's Lizzie, who's the old lady of the group.
Right.
She's her little tin Lizzie, like a you know, old Ford. And in front of her little collectibles store, there's 3 old, really old, like from the 1920s era, old-fashioned gas pumps. Well, they are not old whatsoever. We made those. They're fiberglass, and then our expert. Oh, dude! I mean, when I saw them getting painted, the paint department at Lexington, they were so amazing. I remember the lady who was in charge of the paint department. It was this really super nice lady named Patty, and they just did such an amazing job of painting them up and aging them. You know, it was just really, really. They look spectacular. You know, and then you've got them in front of that whole rest of the facade of the building, and also it really all just comes together, you know, just really, really comes together. So, and then again, as we keep going further down into Cars Land, there's you know, Flo's V8, the diner, and we did a lot of stuff for Flo's V8. When you walk in front and you see the restaurant, all of the gas pumps that are all in front of the restaurant where all the outside tables are, those are all fiberglass. We sculpted it in heavy urethane foam, and then they were sent out and have fiberglass molds made off of those, and all these fiberglass copies were made off of those molds, and then we did the final assembly, and our paint department painted them up, and they just look amazing. And you know, things like that, when they're going to be outside, they have to be built extra tough to handle being manhandled by the public, as well as being made and painted with special material so they can withstand being out in the hot California sun and the sunlight. And so you have to use special paints, you know, so all this extra care, all these extra steps have to be done to do these, you know, things that's going to be outdoors. As well as we made all these big stacks of oil cans. And the oil cans, the large oversized oil cans, are actually very thin aluminum wall tubing. And then the tops and bottoms were fiberglass. And then Disney supplied graphics, and then they brought all the graphics to us. And then we applied the graphics to the aluminum tubes. And then they all had to be assembled and then bolted together so that they couldn't be knocked over, and that they would survive out in the weather. So it's a lot. It's very labor intensive doing all these things to make them withstand the weather and the elements and the guests. And then when you go inside Flo's V8, when you first enter, to the far left-hand side, there are 4 like oil dispensers, as if it's saying to the cars, oh, well, we offer these 4 different flavors, these 4 different types of oils that you can choose from for your meal. Yeah, exactly. And then when you actually go up to the register to order, it all being done up like an old-fashioned 50s style diner, back in the day in 50s style diners, there were these devices where you could put in a quarter, and for a quarter you could get it to play like 5 different songs off of old-fashioned 45 records. And so these were done up giant size, so it would cover up the register but still fit the theming. And again, we sculpted the originals out of heavy urethane foam. We sent them out, had molds made, we had fiberglass copies made, and then we had found a company in Burbank, and they're the only people I know of in the whole world who have this technology, and they have it patented. They can put a real nickel chrome plate onto plastics and even rubbers. Whoa. And so we had these fiberglass body shells, these giant size fiberglass body shells of these old fashioned 50s jukebox controls, real chromed. So when you put your hand on them, it's like, wow, they feel cold. It's a real chrome nickel plate onto fiberglass,
which is insane.
Yeah. And we had to custom make up the keys, and then we made a mold off of them so we could reproduce them, because rather than making all those keys by hand, we made one set of keys, and then we just made a mold and cast them, because that's going to be a lot more durable, and it's all about being durable at that point. So we made those 3. I made those 3 cash register pieces that are there. And then again, we've traveled further down through Cars Land, and you pass Luigi's Tire Shop, and it's most well known for the iconic giant leaning tower of tires in front of it.
Right.
And our very talented metal shop there at Lexington Scenery, that tower of tires actually has there's a skeleton underneath it all of titanium steel.
Whoa, titanium.
And as tall as it is, as what you see, half of that same height, more steel underground, cast into a concrete pillar for earthquake stability. And then all the actual tires themselves, we custom sculpted them, and then we had them cast out of fiberglass, and then we had to very carefully cover the titanium steel understructure with these fake tires, so it looks just like a bunch of tires stacked on top of each other.
Well, does it go in pieces? I mean, they didn't send that whole thing down at that full height.
No, it was sent down at its full height, but it was laid down flat.
Oh, okay.
And then it was made so that it was supported at one end and the other, so it was never really touching the ground.
Okay.
And then it came apart. The part that's sitting underground and the part that's above ground were bolted together at that point.
Okay.
And about when it was finally installed, I think about 20 feet up, there are some tires that we made out of a special sound transparent fiberglass, and the Disney sound technicians fitted indoor outdoor speakers in the tire about 20 feet up, so that they can play out ambient sound or make announcements or whatever, and you don't see any speakers anywhere. Whoa. But they're hidden up in the tires.
Is there a way into that? Because I would imagine something might go wrong. They might need to get inside there.
You'd have to use a scissor lift to get up there, and there are bolts on the backside that the guests can't see.
Okay, so there is a way into service them, right?
Yeah. But again, to get into it, you'd have to do it by getting a scissor lift to get up high, and then get into it from the backside and all that sort of stuff. So, and then when you go into the ride for Luigi's Cars ride, the pre-show area, it's as if you're walking into a tire shop. So the walls are just full of tires sitting on the shelves of what type of tires you want to buy for your car and everything. We had to custom sculpt all of those tires. We made like 8 different tires, and then we molded them, and then they made a whole bunch of copies to put on the shelves. We thought, well, this is kind of odd. Why not just use real tires? And then,
well, rubber rods.
No, actually they don't, because car tires are not made out of rubber anymore. They're all synthetic materials. It was actually more of a legal issue. They did, if they were to do so, they'd have to get the okay from all the different tire companies.
Right.
They're okay to put them there. And rather than do that, they just avoided it by having custom tires made.
There you go.
And the next time you go through there, look at some of those tires. On the sidewall of the tires, some of them, it says, instead of it saying Goodyear, it says Lightyear.
Yes.
As a little joke reference to Buzz Lightyear. So those are the couple of things we did there for Luigi's. And then the really big thing that we did for Cars Land is actually the ride. The Radiator Springs Racers ride. Lexington got the contract to build about 80% of the show ride interior.
Whoa.
So like when you first go in and you first enter into the dark ride, we did all the rock work, sculpting all the rock work, and we built Mac the truck, which you almost, you on the ride, it seems like you're almost going to do a head-on collision with him. We built Mac the truck, and we did more of the countryside, more of the rock work. And then when you actually enter Radiator Springs, we built all the downsized sets for that portion. And there's even a part of it where the sets were made in forced perspective. There's at one point you look down the road as if you were looking down the main thoroughfare of the little town. And that's all been built in forced perspective. So even the neon had to be made in forced perspective. It was amazing to see it all assembled before it got sent to the park. We didn't do the portion where they talk with you about, oh, well, let's get your car a new paint job and some new tires, right, and this is what your car will look like. And we didn't do that stuff. I'm not sure who did that stuff, but then as your two cars come together, just as the race is about to start, there's this big stone arch with all these stone blocks there. Well, as a little bit of a joke, we hid our initials of our names very, very loosely carved into those blocks. But even before, you could barely tell, only if you knew what to look for, and even after they got installed, they hung some banners there, so you really don't see the blocks all that well, but we know they're there, and that's all that matters to us.
It's treating it like your own personal gold press platinum.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But again, we were very loose. It's you can't make it out unless you know what to look for.
Still, actually, a lot of the things you've mentioned today are, I can see it in my head, and that's just because I'm one of those people that have been to the park a gazillion times. But it might be some fun things for our listeners to go and look for.
Exactly.
Which, as usual, we will have a photo package put up on our Facebook group, right? That I'll put together. I'll work with Max on that. So you guys, if you can't make it to the park, you can at least see what we were talking about. But if you do make it to the park, boy, I would love to hear or see pictures of our people who listen to our podcast in front of some of your stuff. I think that would be really cool.
That would be kind of cool. That'd be a lot of fun.
So as you're listening to this and you're visiting Cars Land, or I don't know, they don't have any of that Wizard of Oz stuff.
No, I always wondered what happened with it, because like I said, they took all that stuff out for when they changed it from the Great Movie Ride to Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. So yeah, I'm always intrigued as to what happened to all that stuff. What happened to those things I made years ago, and where are they now?
Well, yeah, actually, one thing we can do, we can take pictures of ourselves of as many Max built things as we can.
Yes.
But, I would also love to see any of our listeners that have, it's funny. They might go and do it, or they might have already taken pictures of themselves in front of these things, not knowing that they were built by you. So either way, we could get some really interesting pictures from people that listen to the show, from our fans. So that might be a fun thing to do for you folks out there in listening land. Boy, this has been really fun talking about all this stuff. I love to hear all the things, all the stuff. I love trivia about the parks. I love, this was here and this is by that. There's a bunch more stories, not stuff that you built, but just around.
I love Disneyland trivia.
Yes, episode. I mean, I would be shocked if the Neverland Clubhouse couldn't do 37 episodes just on things you didn't know about Disneyland. Right?
That's very true.
But
like here's a bit of trivia that I can tell you right off the bat. After America Scenes closed, never to want to waste anything. Yes. Part of the reason why Splash Mountain got built is because this then they didn't have to worry about spending a budget for making all of these animatronic animals that they were going to populate Splash Mountain with. They took all of the animatronic animals that had been built already for America Sings and they repurposed them. They made new costumes for them.
Some of them not so much, Max. Some of them straight across.
Well, yes, exactly. And they all got repurposed and they got reused in Splash Mountain, except for two very curious geese. And you know where those two geese went?
In your house right now?
No, I should wish that to be the case. No, those two geese are still in Disneyland, and those geese became droids in the queue for Star Tours.
That's right.
And one of those geese is voiced by Patrick Warburton.
Patrick Warburton, yes. Spoon!
Patrick Warburton is the voice of the G2 droids in Star Tours.
He'll always be Tick to me.
He will. He was an awesome Tick. Spoon!
Yes. I always yell that at the pre-show for Soarin'.
He's always been the voice for the G2 droids. Even after they redid Star Tours into Star Tours The Adventure Continues, they had him come back in and they had him redo new dialogue for them.
You can see that if you look at those robots closely and you look at their feet.
Look at their feet, exactly.
Yeah, and even just look at their body, and then imagine that with a feather thing over it, and you go, oh.
Even to the point where their tail was, they put a little antenna there, and there's a little blinking red LED on the tip of the tail. And that was another sign of them having previously been geese.
And actually, I think those are great droids. I've always thought, boy, they should use those. Those would be great in Star Wars.
Right. I think it would be really cute to see those as a little nod, to see those walking around in an episode of the animated series.
Yeah, well, things could happen. Hey, you know what? Maybe since if Jon Favreau listens to our podcast, he could take this as a hint. Right.
I could only hope that Jon Favreau was listening to our little podcast.
Can you imagine? Hey, I was listening to this podcast. These two guys, boy, they're geniuses.
Yeah. They're such geniuses. I should hire them.
Oh my. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap this one.
I think so. Wrap this one and put a bow on it.
And I will try to contain my excitement for the 30th.
Oh, I can't wait.
So I would like to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of the Max Effects Podcast. And we will be back next month with some more stories of Max Cervantes' special effects career. And please check out all the rest of the shows on the Skywalking Network. Skynet. These other shows that you can catch on the Skywalking Network are classic Marvel Star Wars comics, Talking Apes, Neverland Clubhouse, Resilient Squadron, and Totally Tell Me Everything, but most importantly, the flagship show, Skywalking Through Neverland. And there are new shows coming very soon. So you know where you can find all that information is at skywalkingthroughneverland.com. Simple, all one word with a .com on the end, guys. It's super easy. If you want to reach out to us on social media, just go to the Max Effects Podcast Facebook group. And now we have a regular Facebook page, but the group is where all the action is, folks. So find the Max Effects Podcast Facebook group and leave us a message. Please let us know what you think of each episode. Go through them all. And because there's little fun things in all of them, I assure you, there's got to be something you're interested in. You let us know what you think. And here's a good one, Max. Please leave us a review at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcatcher. That would, we'd love to hear. That would help others to find us, and we always love to hear what you think of us. So there it is, guys. We'll see you next time, huh?